And probably starting with, I imagine, not only the most interesting story this week, but one that really seems to have caught everybody's attention and imagination, is Revolut's ad that caused a bit of a revolt. So over on BBC News / literally everywhere that I move around on the internet right now is a backlash over single shaming banking ad. Now, if only we had somebody on the show who actually was really heavily involved in this one, who maybe could take the cue from this one and sort of run with it.
Yeah, explain what's going on here.
So I saw these ads on the tube and, like many people, thought that they were absolutely dreadful on so many levels. And so I thought, I'll tweet. Because I've been writing about money for 8 years now, and I like to study how brands and companies convey their values to customers. It's very important as a journalist that you take a judgment about that, I think, when you're working in this space. So I thought, this is my territory. I feel like I'm qualified to go on a bit of a Twitter rant. So I did, posted it, thought nothing of it. And then ever since then, it's like I can't remember what my life was like before I did this Twitter thread. It has gone really crazy. I've had so many people get in touch with me who don't really have much to do with banking or marketing or FinTech. Normal people who are really, really worried and confused about what this advert was telling them, as well as feeling like it was just in really, really poor taste. So it's been a bit of a mad week.
What's really bizarre to me is, like, you were going to be coming on the show before this happened, and now it is sort of escalated and escalated and escalated. So it's fantastic time for having you on the news show to talk about it.
We did not plan this.
I know, yeah. It's like somehow we can like create crazy panic online type thing. But yeah, so your phone is melting, and we're at this point now where I think you've been called into various different places to go and talk about this as well, right?
Yes, because the story has taken on a life of its own. So it's moved beyond me calling this out on Twitter and there being a really strong response to that initial tweet thread. It has gone beyond that to raising lots of questions about how Revolut has handled this whole saga, and particularly whether their marketing and communications strategy has been effective, and whether it has actually prolonged the controversy and painted Revolut in quite a bad light. So now there's lots of questions about whether or not they could have handled me better, whether they should have issued a much clearer apology to its customers, whether they should have made it clear that these ads were a spoof in the first place, because that wasn't at all clear.
I think it's probably worth, if you haven't seen the ads, you could probably Google them. If you're listening along, though, and you haven't seen the ad copy reads something along these lines. It says, so you imagine you're standing waiting for the tube and you see an advertisement with a Revolut card that says, to the 12,750 people who ordered a single takeaway on Valentine's Day, you okay, hon? And complaints include insensitivity and single shaming. And I guess the thing that also got pointed out here is it's an actual rip-off of some Spotify ads that were from 2018. So Spotify, now listen to the Spotify ad. To the 3,749 people who streamed It's the End of the World as We Know It on the day of the Brexit vote, hang in there. The concept is the same, but the tone is yet somehow so powerfully different. And it's a direct copy.
Isn't that interesting, though, that, we always know that it's not what you're saying, it's how you say it,
yes.
Right? And actually, I do worry about Revolut quite a lot, because they've been so successful in doing so many things. They're moving so fast. They're delivering amazing things, and now they're out to Singapore or in the US and like developing all of these things. But there's like those sort of cultural sensitivities that if you're not getting in your home market very effectively, and you've not got the filtration within your internal organization to stop these things happening before they get to market, that you're going to really piss people off in Singapore and China and all sorts of places. I do think, though, like my concern slightly is context, because there are things that Revolut do say that I do say myself. So they're famed for saying get shit done. And I will say, like I live by the whole get shit done, but it's not the purpose, the context of doing it in an organization to talking about it as from an industry perspective can be perceived and can be taken in completely different ways. So it is an amazing, like, language is a funny thing, right?
Intent is such an important thing.
Really
and I
is.
think you can see a lot from the apology that doesn't sound sincere, which is, we're sad to hear that a small number of people were offended by our tube ad. That's why we'll be hosting drinks events on Valentine's Day for anybody who doesn't yet have plans. P.S. Vegan sausage rolls will be served. So again, that communicates to me, one, not taking it seriously. Two, actually you're talking down to the people who were offended by it, and you're saying there's a small number of them.
It's the non-apology. That's the shit I say to my wife when we've argued and I want it to be over, but I am not apologizing. It's like, I'm sorry you're offended is not, I'm sorry I've offended you. That's me saying, like, I'm sorry you've overreacted, which is just ridiculous, isn't it?
Well, it's very strange because what's happened is that within my original Twitter critique, I talked about this aspect of single shaming, which obviously got picked up by a lot of the mainstream press because it's a very headline-grabbing notion. And I completely stand by that. I believe that advert was inviting people to pity and mock those who are single on Valentine's Day, which is such a backwards, regressive message for a FinTech company to be sending out. It was so bizarre. But besides that, what I was also pointing out was that this was misrepresenting what the company was doing with its consumers' data. And Revolut has completely refused to acknowledge that point at all.
Which is a crucial issue.
Absolutely. That's the issue at stake here, because that gets to the heart of what they do. And for the general public who don't know that much about how banks work, and especially now that we're, trying to raise awareness of what open banking is and engender trust in open banking, I feel like this really sets back the cause massively. It damages trust in brands. It makes people think that their banks are snooping on them and using their data against them to make crude judgments. And now Revolut have made it so much worse by just not holding their hands up and going, we got this wrong. We shouldn't have adopted this tone. We should have made it clearer that the information was made up. And we accept that we made a mistake. Instead, they've doubled down and gone for this non-apology. And now it's transpiring that there is a lot of discontent within Revolut about the outward strategy that they've adopted. Judging by some of the emails that I've been getting, there is a lot of dissatisfaction brewing around how Revolut's handled this whole saga.
And do you want to just fill people in who haven't caught up quite on that? Me being one of them, because I've been in meetings literally all day today. But I got 40 seconds before this going, this is getting worse. So, and I've just jumped on your Twitter, but what's happened to get people up to speed?
So I received an anonymous encrypted email through my website. The password was the marketing genius behind this strategy that they've adopted this last week. So I had to enter that, and then I was able to access what appears to be an internal Slack showing how employees reacted to the story, and featuring some really tone-deaf comments, which now I'm told this email must have come from somebody who saw this, was pretty appalled, and thought I ought to know about it.
That is pretty terrifying. It feels like this one's going to run and run and run, doesn't it, in terms of the impact? And I think, like you say, it does, not just in terms of Revolut, but actually just for companies more broadly, that tone deafness and how you position not only, like we said, what you're saying, but the way in which you say it is going to be really, really important. And it's a sign of maybe the times. We've got FinTech companies who maybe aren't as robust or sophisticated or got the experience that big organizations do, and sometimes that lack of sort of judgment and the cavalier nature of this, we should have sort of expected this in some instances. I think we've seen maybe Revolut, particularly on Twitter, emulating some of the things that people like Wendy's have done in the US, where they've been more provocative, they've tried to be funny, but it's really easy to come off like a dick.
Absolutely. And I would say that the way they treated me, they really maligned me as a snowflake, a blogger whose opinion didn't count for anything. Well, that's not true. I've been writing the Young Money blog for 8 years. I've written a book. I speak at events. Lots of people in the industry know who I am. It was a big mistake for them to paint me as that particular, snowflake model. But then also, I think that with what's going to transpire with the FCA now looking into Revolut and whether or not they misrepresented the service that they provided, they're going to have to provide a proper apology about why they put out this advert that was misleading. And I think with that will come an acknowledgement that you can't just hide behind this fig leaf of snowflake triggering and snowflake bashing whenever somebody calls out an advert for being misleading and false and in bad taste.
Yeah. It's funny. I thought when we sort of got, it's not funny. I mean, it's funny. I expected the thing that we'd have a trouble with from a FinTech perspective would have been on a regulatory thing or a risk miscalculation. But just fucking up on marketing seems like the thing that they shouldn't have done in the first place, right?
From a company who a year ago was saying they don't pay for marketing.
maybe they should.
Maybe they should. Any thoughts from the panel there?
I think we've also got really used to, especially with Monzo, where every time something kind of happens and the press kind of picks it up, they're the first people to come out and say, do you know what, we hold our hands up, we got this a bit wrong, here's the reasons why we did everything. And I think as an industry, we got to this kind of expectation that, yeah, people might get it wrong sometimes, but they'll own up to it and then they'll make it right. And I think that's what's been really surprising in this situation is, I think as fellow FinTechers, we do hold ourselves to very high standards. The reason FinTech exists is to put customers first, because that wasn't happening before. So that's where it kind of messed up for me, where I'm like, oh, I know you've done a good thing because I know you've built a good product that has helped lots and lots of people, and you've done an amazing thing. And it's what they did is they got it wrong. And people do get stuff wrong, people make mistakes, but then to not kind of deal with that in the way that we would expect and how other people in the industry would expect is really difficult to kind of handle.
And it is interesting on that point, because I know you guys are free trade, and I know like through the conversation that we've had with like Monzo and various different players, they're placing as much emphasis on creating the internal culture and putting in place the processes to create true transparency, that things like that in terms of the Slack channel that's been sent to you would have been common knowledge across the entirety of the company. So actually it's maybe there's less time being spent in Revolut worrying about how they are as a business, and too much time spent on the only thing is the stuff that we're delivering to customers, which is the difference between building a nice building or 1,000 slaves dying for your pyramid type thing. I kind of think there's got to be a nice sort of balance in terms of what you're doing.
I personally don't think as well that all publicity is good publicity in this case, because the target market that I think Revolut are aiming for are not going to be impressed by any of this. And the only people who seem to have found this all very amusing are not the kind of people that I think Revolut want as customers.
I like marketing because you can steal a lot of ideas. I do steal a lot of ideas. I'm sure you, Mel, you are in marketing.
Take creative inspiration
from... draw inspiration, right?
It was Pablo Picasso that said, good artists copy, great artists steal.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what you absolutely do in marketing. And that's what Revolut did as well, right? Like the whole campaign is an exact replica of the Spotify campaign, which was, if I remember correctly, it was called... 2018, it was weird. I think that was like the kind of the campaign, and it was a quirky company giving some quirky data, but kind of like in a kind way, and that was the reflection of their internal culture. And when a marketing campaign goes wrong like this, that's a reflection of your internal culture. That's how I think about it. Not to advertise my own company so much, but one thing I'm really proud of, you walk into the free trade office, the first thing you see as a sign, treat customers fairly. That's not something we made up, that's a principle by the FCA, that's something we hold in very, very high regard. And everything kind of stems from that, like how we treat customer data, how we talk about customers internally. When we do user testing, when we discuss the results in our internal Slack, everyone's really respectful. No one's like, oh yeah, this dumb user or something like that. It's all about your internal culture. That's what I think. And maybe another thought related to that it's been a while since I studied marketing and advertising, but I think one definition of advertising is to inform, persuade, and remind consumers of your brand or product, right? And in a way, this campaign was actually successful. We are talking about it. There was a BBC article. It became a thing. The sign-ups may not be too bad as a result. There is a certain level of cultural struggle. They don't maybe speak to everyone, but there is a segment of the population they do speak to. So, maybe this marketing campaign wasn't that bad. It might be a controversial idea, but...
I think trying to get scale with such diversive tactics, I think are going to be really difficult. But again, I guess we're not going to know until we know on this one.
True,
So.
I agree, David. I think like comprehensively, right? Like as a financial company, you want to create trust and all that, but maybe for certain segments that they want to attract, maybe for them, this kind of campaign wasn't the worst idea.
Yeah,
I don't know.
completely. We have a policy internally at 11FS, which is pretty straightforward. It's don't be a dick. And we sort of try and take that into marketing and actions and everything, because it covers everything really, all bases. But anyway, moving on.